of November 7, 1990, in downtown Montreal, an American tourist was swimming in the rooftop pool of the Hilton Hotel in Place Bonaventure. As she looked up to the night sky, she noticed something strange. She would soon be joined by other hotel guests and employees, journalists, and even multiple law enforcement agencies, making this one of the most famous and best documented UFO cases in Canada's history. This is the mystery of the Montreal UFO. At around 7:30 p.m., 15 minutes after first noticing the phenomenon, the woman shared her observation with the pool's lifeguard, Lynn Saint-Pierre. The lifeguard looked up to the sky and saw what seemed to be a UFO. She would later produce this sketch, which shows 8 yellow lights in a circular pattern, surrounded by 6 white beams of light. Immediately, Saint-Pierre alerted the hotel's security officer, Albert Sterling, and urged him to come quickly. She then called the local newspaper, La Presse, to inform them of the strange phenomenon. At the same time, about a kilometer to the northeast, 2 men witnessed a similar phenomenon in the sky. They described it as a bright spot with greenish light beams coming out of it. They observed it for a minute or less and then left. In an interview with the CBC, one of the 2 men, Bernard Guénette, said the following.
I saw that very hot light that was spread between these 2 buildings. It was a greenish light which looked like Borealis aurora, but was still doesn't move like these northern lights usually moves.
The 2 buildings he pointed are the Notre Dame Basilica of Montreal and this apartment building. Logically, we should expect to see Place Bonaventure somewhere in that direction. However, Place Bonaventure is over here. Keep in mind that at the same time, people on the rooftop of Place Bonaventure were observing the phenomenon straight above them. Some people think that these 2 men witnessed a second UFO, but taking into consideration that this interview was filmed 4 years after the events, there is a strong possibility that Guénette was simply mistaken and didn't remember precisely in which direction he saw the phenomenon. A few minutes later, the security officer arrived on the rooftop of the hotel. His first impression of the UFO was of, quote, fallen debris from the sky, a satellite or other space object. In fear that the thing could explode at any time, Sterling called the Montreal Urban Community Police, or MUCP. He then tried to call the traffic controllers at the Dorval airport to try to get more information about the object, but the line was busy. Meanwhile, at the La Presse offices, the journalist Marcel Laroche was going on with his work as usual when the copy desk chief told him about the ongoing situation at Place Bonaventure. With no better story to cover, Laroche left the La Presse offices in direction of the hotel. On his arrival, at around 8 p.m., he was greeted by Lynn Saint-Pierre, who told him, quote, listen, I'm not crazy, I didn't drink, but look at this thing in the sky. Laroche looked up above him and confirmed the presence of the UFO. But at that time, clouds were starting to form just below the object and were partially obscuring it. Amazed by the view, Laroche called his copy desk chief and asked him to send a photographer, but unfortunately, none was available at the time. Knowing he absolutely needed a picture of this UFO, Laroche went back to his car to get his personal camera. In the parking lot, he noticed a police car getting parked close to him. In the car was the police officer François Lippé, who had just been dispatched in response to Sterling's earlier call. Laroche introduced himself to the police officer and then guided him to the rooftop. In the elevator, the policeman mockingly said, quote, "Should I get my gun ready?" However, once on the rooftop, his attitude changed as he could only ascertain the presence of what appeared to be a UFO. A few moments later, the police officer, the journalist, and the lifeguard all saw a small Cessna-type airplane fly near the UFO. According to them, the plane appeared to be flying at much lower altitude than the unidentified object. Meanwhile, a woman was driving on Champlain Boulevard when her daughter noticed unusual lights in the direction of the downtown. They described two bright white lights surrounded by other smaller lights. The phenomenon appeared to be completely stationary and silent. Back to Place Bonaventure, Officer Lippe made a call to his superior, Sergeant Robert Masson, and insisted that he should come to see the, quote, out-of-the-ordinary sighting. Masson arrived at 8:30 p.m. After seeing the lights for himself, Masson was convinced that it was indeed a UFO. In such circumstances, it is the responsibility of the federal authorities to handle the situation. Masson called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP. He was told that investigator Luc Morin would be assigned to the case. In the following moments, the two MUCP officers would make multiple phone calls, including to the Dorval Airport, the Mirabel Airport, and the Saint-Hubert military base. During each call, they were told that no object was showing up on their radar. Only the usual air traffic was visible to them. However, the controller at the Dorval Airport said that he received many calls about strange lights, which implies there might be other eyewitnesses we don't know about. As the police officers were on the phone, Marcel Laroche was trying to take pictures of the UFO. Concerned that the film in his camera wouldn't be sensitive enough to capture the phenomenon, he called a photographer to get some advice. Following the instructions given by the photographer, Laroche placed his camera on a bench, pointing it directly upward. He set the focus distance to infinity and took two long exposure shots of roughly 30 seconds each. Laroche then went back to his office to get his pictures developed. I will discuss them in a moment, but for now, let's continue with the rest of the observations. At 9 p.m., Luc Morin, the RCMP investigator, was about to leave his home. However, before he hit the road, he made a quick call to the Saint-Hubert military base to ask if any military operations were underway. The answer was negative. 30 minutes later, Morin arrived at Place Bonaventure. The UFO was still there, although it was much less visible than earlier. Morin talked with a guest who happens to be a pilot for Air Canada. The guest was convinced that the UFO was hovering at above 2,500 meters of altitude. However, there was a thick and dense layer of snow clouds at around 1,100 meters at that time, making his assertion very unlikely. Right across the street from the hotel was the construction site of what would become the highest tower in Montreal. The site was lit up by floodlights mounted on two tower cranes. Some people raised the possibility that these lights could be reflected on the clouds and give the illusion of a UFO. To confirm this hypothesis, the police ordered for the lights to be turned off. But the UFO was still there. As the cloud cover grew, the UFO was less and less visible, until around 10 past 10 p.m. when it was no longer visible from Place Bonaventure. In the following moments, all the police officers and journalists left the hotel. At around 11 p.m., Pierre Caumartin was driving home on Notre Dame Street when he noticed a strange object hovering above the Montreal Olympic Stadium, 6.5 kilometers from Place Bonaventure. At first, he thought it was a large blimp, but he quickly realized that it didn't move like a man-made object. Caumartin would then stop by a park near his home, where he would watch the object for a few more minutes. This is how he described his sighting in an interview with the CBC.
The lighting was definitely very strong. It was definitely big. I could hear from here, and this is where I heard the sound of the object. It was like some kind of a neat purring sound. Just a little rhythmic purring. And the way this thing was moving was very strange because it was very static. It could be very static, wouldn't budge. And then it would like glide and go down very fast.
Caumartin's sighting is somewhat controversial, as the description he made doesn't quite match the descriptions made by other witnesses. He said the object was moving, made a noise, and had a triangular shape, contrary to the others who said the object was still, silent, and round. It's also been pointed out that Caumartin only came forward with his story almost a whole year after the incident. Nonetheless, it is generally accepted that Caumartin witnessed the same UFO. In the days following the sighting, Jules Béliveau, a La Presse journalist, received a letter dated November 8, 1990 from François Chèvrefils. The writer claimed that his friend was flying a small plane over Montreal between 7:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. on the night of the events when he witnessed a UFO. The pilot refused every invitations to interviews, leaving us with little to no information about this claim. Some made the connection between the pilot's story and the small plane observed by the people at Place Bonaventure, but this is only speculations. Laroche took a total of 12 pictures as he was on the rooftop of the Bonaventure Hotel. Of those 12 pictures, 10 were severely underexposed, and only 2 would reveal the phenomenon, frame 13 and frame 14. Frame 13 is the most widely circulated picture of this UFO. However, until recently, it was only ever shown in news broadcasts, documentaries, and newspaper articles. Trying to find this picture online mostly gives us screenshots taken from those news broadcasts and documentaries. It's only a few years ago that a scanned version of the original frame was uploaded online at a disappointing resolution of 900 pixels by 585 pixels. In the picture, we can see 2 sets of lights. The first set, in the center of the frame, is composed of 5 or 6 yellow lights, depending on who you ask. The second set in the other part of the frame is composed of 4 dimmer white lights. Frame 14 is much harder to find. It actually doesn't show up in any Google search. I was nonetheless able to find a physical copy of it in an archive. The frame shows essentially the same thing as the previous one, but it was exposed for slightly less longer, resulting in a darker image. For this reason, only the brighter lights are visible. As it is often the case when it comes to UFOs, the pictures themselves are quite underwhelming. Out of context, they only appear to show slightly blurry lights that could well be anything. It's only when we know the story behind them that the pictures become interesting. On November 8, 1990, this article appeared in the newspaper La Presse, alongside one of the pictures taken by Marcel Laroche. To say that the rendering of the picture is horrible is an understatement. Nonetheless, the news spread rapidly, and by the evening, everyone was talking about it. The Canadian government confirmed the legitimacy of the incident, but they couldn't offer any explanations as to what was seen hovering the city, leaving the public with nothing but speculations. Some were quick to blame the tower cranes of the construction site next to Place Bonaventure, claiming they could have easily been mistaken for a UFO. But we know this isn't the case, as the lights of the construction site were turned off under police instruction, and it had no effect on the UFO. Unfortunately, this detail wasn't well known to the public, which led many people to believe this explanation. The possibility that this whole situation was the result of nothing less but northern lights was brought up by the astronomer Robert Lamontagne, as reported in this newspaper article published on November 9. Although the UFO didn't look or move like northern lights, the astronomer notes that some rare type of auroras can take a similar form to what's been described by the witnesses. However, the same day, in a different newspaper, the meteorologist Marc Gélinas dismissed this hypothesis due to the presence of a thick and dense layer of clouds that would have obscured the view to such an event. It was also later revealed that no unusual solar activity was recorded that night, making the sightings of northern lights in Montreal practically impossible. According to Marc Gélinas, the UFO was probably the result of spotlights shining on the low cloud cover he mentioned. Although this explanation can be proved wrong too. Throughout the observations, the cloud cover dropped of about 400 meters of altitude. If lights were shining on those clouds, they would have become brighter and more focused as the clouds got closer, similarly to a flashlight getting closer to a wall. This is the complete opposite to what's actually been observed. As the clouds lowered, the lights became dimmer and even seemed to be swallowed by the clouds, until they completely disappeared. Strangely enough, the construction site explanation would become the most accepted theory. One of the witnesses I mentioned earlier, Bernard Guénette, happens to be fascinated by UFOs and to be a member of the Mutual UFO Network. In the days following his sighting, he set out to collect any useful information about the UFO in order to submit a report to MUFON. Guénette then collaborated with the American ufologist Richard F. Haynes to help him analyze the data he collected. Haynes is a former psychologist for NASA at the Ames Research Center. His work was focused on ergonomics and human-to-machine interactions, which has nothing to do with UFOs, but like Guénette, Haynes has a passion for unidentified aerial phenomenons, and he was known to have analyzed other cases. In spring of 1992, nearly a year and a half after the events, Haynes and Guénette published a report untitled Details Surrounding a Large Stationary Aerial Object Above Montreal. The conclusion is staggering. According to Haynes, there is no doubt that a dense, physical object was present in the sky that night. According to his estimations, the object was hovering at an altitude of 1,060 meters to 2,700 meters and had a diameter of at least 540 meters. To give you an idea, this is how big it would have been next to the downtown. Haynes explained that a UFO shaped like a flat disc and oriented at a 30-degree angle would create a similar light pattern to what's seen in the picture. What's more, as the cloud overcast got lower, it would have gradually obscured the UFO exactly as observed. The foundation of Haynes' conclusion lies on the analysis of Marcel Laroche's photograph. Haynes borrowed a process allegedly used by NASA to establish the density of the phenomenon depicted in the pictures. In a first part, the picture was digitized and processed to highlight brightness variations. The result is this false color 3D graph. In the second part, the picture was passed through so-called densitometry scans, which demonstrate the difference in luminous density between the background sky and the UFO. This is supposed to be the bulletproof argument justifying the claims that an actual physical object was in the sky of Montreal that night. However, this whole process is honestly kind of dubious, and I personally don't see how it's supposed to prove the physical density of anything. All it truly proves is that some parts of the photograph are brighter than others. The conclusion reached by Richard Haynes is disputable. However, the data presented in the report is relevant to anyone attempting to solve this mystery. Even to this day, it is one of the best sources of information available about this case. Fast forward 16 years after the incident, in December of 2006, the Canadian TV show Northern Mysteries featured a story of the Montreal UFO in an episode. Now you might be asking yourself, why are you bringing up a TV show? Well, it's because of this guy, Sergeant Robert Masson. Masson made strange claims during his appearance on the show, and some of them seem to suggest a conspiracy. What the hell? Oh fuck. Okay, no, but for real, listen to this thing Masson had to say.
On the phone, the air traffic controller told me that on the radar screen, they currently had a cargo plane on final approach over the downtown area. At that moment, I was on a cell phone outside and I saw the plane fly over us, but it flew underneath the object. And so I asked him, I said, what altitude your plane at? And he says a couple of 100 feet above 6,000. And I said, is there anything else above it? And he says, I have nothing. There was nothing else on the radar except for the cargo plane.
There is absolutely no mention of this elsewhere prior to this interview, not even in the police report. However, this reminds me of the plane that was seen by Officer Lippe and the others. That could possibly be what Masson is talking about here, except he wasn't even there when that happened, and the plane observed was a small plane, not a large cargo. And now you're probably thinking, okay, but where is the conspiracy? Well, the show's narrator then said this.
If the civil aviation radars weren't picking it up, perhaps the ones at the Saint-Hubert military base were.
At that size, you better be sure we would see it.
But by the end of their conversation, Officer Masson was convinced that the controller was hiding something from him.
It's not much, but you can start to see where this is going. Now listen to this part.
The RCMP officer called the Army. He probably had some access code or something like that. At any rate, they listened to him. Then, in the time it takes for an F-18 to get to Place Bonaventure from Bagotville, about 14, 15, 16 minutes, it was on the scene. We didn't see it, but we heard it. We were sure it was up there, and he told me it had taken pictures.
According to the RCMP report, Luc Morin called the Saint-Hubert military base from his home, which contradicts what Masson just said. Luc Morin himself would also firmly deny this claim. Military personnel from the Bagotville military base stated that no interception measures were undertaken due to the lack of radar detection. At the end of the documentary, the narrator says the following.
Unfortunately, it is impossible to find out the results of the reconnaissance flights made by the Canadian Forces F-18s. What's more, all reports of the sighting by municipal police officers and RCMP officers became officially inaccessible as of the next day. On November 8th, 2 officers from NORAD, the agency responsible for protecting North American airspace, were instructed to collect all findings relating to this apparition in the Montreal sky.
All of this is completely false. There is no evidence to support that the reconnaissance flight even happened. and both the MUCP and RCMP reports are available to anyone who requests them. Ironically, they show parts of the actual reports, as the narrator says that the reports are inaccessible. One of the show's scenarists said that they got this information from Robert Masson, and even though they knew it was false, the producers decided to include it in the episode anyway. This show is how many people, including myself, were first made aware of this case. 16 years after the event, most people had completely forgotten about it, and a whole new generation had grown up and never heard about this incident. This episode was seen by hundreds of thousands of people, at a time where the internet was now a thing. Only on YouTube, one upload of this episode gained more than 400,000 views. And looking on Google Trends for OVNI Montreal gives us this. Almost nothing before December of 2006, which is when the episode first aired. It's important to note that even though the police and the RCMP reports were accessible in the physical world, they were nowhere to be found on the internet. And the same goes for the Ainskinet report. This TV show alone was pretty much the only source of information available online. It would fuel countless rumors about this case and inevitably conspiracies too. It's the internet after all. In 2008, the Belgian ufologist Wim van Utrecht came across the case of the Montreal UFO. As he was watching a short CBC documentary about the case, he noticed something interesting that would lead him to propose one of the most promising explanations so far. At this moment in the documentary, we can see the hotel's roof at night from an helicopter. Utrecht saw the similarity between the shape created by the pulse light and the shape of the UFO in the picture. It reminded him of a rare optical phenomenon known as light pillars. Most of you probably don't have a clue what light pillars are, so let me explain. Under very specific circumstances, a fine dust of microscopic ice crystals can form in the surrounding air. This is often called diamond dust. The crystals, shaped like flat hexagonal prisms, align themselves almost perfectly horizontally as they fall. This way, they reflect light emitted toward the sky back to the ground. To an observer, the reflections from millions of ice crystals create the illusion of a slightly blurry pillar right above the light source. In most sightings, the pillars appear near the horizon and raise straight up to the sky, just like in this picture. However, if the viewer is close to the light source, or if the diamond dust is at very high altitude, the pillars appear right above the observer's head, like in this example. There is a strong similarity between this picture of light pillars and the pictures taken by Marcel Laroche. After seeing the two pictures side by side, most people are quick to jump to conclusions. However, let's dig a little further. Light pillars demand very specific and most of all, stable weather conditions to form. The type of ice crystals responsible for the phenomenon, plates, form at temperatures between -10 and -20 degrees Celsius, although smaller plates can also form at temperatures near 0 degrees. The diamond dust must also be undisturbed by the wind, or else the ice crystals won't align properly to reflect light. This table from the Ainskinet report shows that temperatures at ground level varied between -6 and 0 degrees throughout the observations, and the wind varied between 4 and 9 km per hour. However, the diamond dust didn't form at ground level, but at higher altitude, where it is usually colder. This graph taken at 7 p.m. on November 8, 1990, shows how rapidly the temperatures goes down at higher altitudes. The conditions that night were not particularly favorable to the formations of light pillars, but they are not completely out of range either. We can't draw any conclusions with the weather data alone. We need something more. In recent years, a newsletter from the Montreal Astronomical Society was found. In it, we learn about an observation made at the Dorval Meteorological Observatory by Michel Sirois at 6:30 p.m. on November 7, 1990. When looking south, Sirois noticed greenish light beams spanning from the horizon to near the zenith. Michel Sirois' account is joined by 3 other similar sightings made in adjacent suburbs. The described phenomenon is utterly similar to light pillars, and it occurred less than an hour before the first sighting of the Montreal UFO. Even if those accounts were concentrated in an area about 15 kilometers to the southwest of Place Bonaventure, the phenomenon could have been blown over the downtown area by the wind, and then further north over the Olympic Stadium where Comartin witnessed the UFO. Although the wind was pointing in a slightly different direction. According to Utrecht, there is no doubt that the phenomenon observed that night was light pillars, and that the pulse lights are the source of the reflections. However, this explanation is not entirely perfect. In 2016, the French ufologist Robert Alessandri used a very clever and simple trick to demonstrate that the pool was definitely not the source of the pillars. In this picture, we can see light pillars caused by the street lamps of a town in Finland. If we overlay the image of the pillars to a map of the town, the pillars and the streets fit almost perfectly. We can use the same technique to see if the lights of the pool match with the lights in the picture. And the lights in the center are really close, except for this one here. However, the other lights don't seem to line up with any source. Some people have also pointed out that pillars should have the same color as their light source, but in this case, the pool's lights are white, and their corresponding pillars are yellow. Clearly, something is not adding up here. If the pool's light were not the source of the pillars, then what was the source? To try to find it, we could simply take the same technique we just used and look for matching lights in a larger area. However, to look over all the possibilities is extremely tedious. It would be much easier if we could narrow down a search area. Luckily for us, we can do just that. François Lippé wrote in his police report, according to witness accounts, the object was more visible at the beginning of the observation because the sky was clear. The more the sky was covered, the less the object was visible. Marcel Laroche, the journalist who took the photograph, described something similar in an interview.
L'objet était toujours fixe, était toujours là. De temps en temps, ça devenait un peu plus difficile à voir parce que j'ai l'impression qu'il passait des nuages.
The Hainskinet report mentioned that a layer of scattered clouds appeared not long after the beginning of the sightings, at an altitude of 900 meters. With this information, we can safely infer that the diamond dust responsible for the light pillars was above the layer of scattered clouds, or the pillars would not have been obscured by the clouds. Additionally, there was a thick and dense layer of clouds at 1,500 meters of altitude at the beginning of the night, which lowered to 1,100 meters by 9:30 p.m. We can say for sure that the diamond dust was below those clouds, but it is likely that as they lowered, they overlapped with the diamond dust, making the pillars harder to see. With an altitude range in hand, we can use some mathematics to estimate the diameter of the circle formed by the inner yellow lights. It gives us a minimum of 64 meters and a maximum of 100 meters. Immediately, we can see that the pool is out of range, but most importantly, we see that no lights in that range seem to fit the pattern we are looking for. Even if we try to slightly expand the search area, nothing fits. It's as if no lights could have possibly caused the light pillars observed. Perhaps something else was in the sky that night. This leaves us with no definitive explanation as to what happened on the night of November 7, 1990. If you ask me, I'm still fairly confident that light pillars are the most probable theory. However, it is just that, a theory. With the lack of new evidence, we will probably never know for sure what was really observed that night, and this case will remain a mystery. Thanks for watching till the end. This is my first time creating a video, so I hope it wasn't too bad. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe. I'll be creating new content soon. Meanwhile, let me know your theories about this incident in the comment section. I'll see you soon. Stay safe. Lilo.